talk about the survey, and it was a couple of things that I wanted you to shed some light on
Sure.
um, for the Pretty Moody community. I know people are asking me, "Wait, I know. Are you still doing the survey?" I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
"It's, I'm one piece, and it's a lot of moving,
Yes,
a lot of moving parts." So, if we can just talk about number one, what the survey is again,
sure.
um, and what you're doing and what we're expecting from all this hard, long work that you're putting in.
Okay. So basically, what we're doing is we're interested in understanding how women go through perimenopause and menopause and how that then presents risk for postmenopausal disease, principally breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, and osteoporosis, although there are other conditions, but those are the main ones we're focused on. And what we are basically looking at is the fact that we know that women are not getting adequate information from their clinical professionals because their clinical professionals aren't getting adequate training in medical school.
Right.
So it's not that they don't want to help, but they're not
Right.
given enough information. And that basically comes from the fact that there's been an under involvement, investment in research into perimenopause and menopause. So what we're trying to do is open up the research field by identifying some questions that we think, and we've validated with gynecologists and obstetricians, are actually important questions, but haven't been asked before. And the kinds of questions that we're interested in are every woman, almost every woman, well, every woman will go through perimenopause and menopause as if she lives to those ages. That's 51% of the world's population. The reality is, while there are up to about 40 different symptoms that may be associated with that, not every woman has every symptom or every symptom to the same degree. And even the gynecologist will admit women go through this transition differently. Now, what does that mean to an individual? Well, most women will rely on their network of friends to try to get information.
That's right.
But when you ask for information, you're usually asking about a specific symptom, their hot
Hmm.
flashes or their brain fog. Okay. And that's a valid question. You want to know if they had them. You want to know
Right.
what they did about them. You want to know if it worked. But the reality is, those are just symptoms, very similar to the idea that fever is a symptom,
Right.
meaning that it can come about for different reasons. It's associated with the transition of through perimenopause and menopause. But what you need to know is one person's hot flashes may actually not be the same as another person's.
That's what I was about to ask you about that, because there are other factors that come in to play when we're having hot flashes.
Right.
So what makes mine different from my girlfriend's?
Well, the question is, or the challenge is, that perimenopause can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years, typically,
Yes.
with menopause on average being around age 51.
Hmm.
So what that means is it's a gradual progression for many women,
Hmm.
not always the same for every woman, of course. And
Right.
what you need to know is where a woman is on that transition when that symptom presents, to know what other symptoms may have preceded it, what other symptoms she may have at the same time, because that's going to differentiate that particular symptom for her from what you have. So if a woman has had hot flashes, but it followed brain fog and another woman had urinary incontinence or something like that, their hot flashes may be somewhat different. Now,
Right.
that doesn't mean they're completely different, but it means that they may be better managed differently at an individual level, and we don't have that information. So the kinds of information we normally collect is a questionnaire of, have you had hot flashes? Have you had brain fog? And then we analyze that to see how much of the population had that symptom.
Right.
But that doesn't tell you in what order did you have those symptoms and which ones occurred together and when did they start. And that really ties to a woman's overall development, because perimenopause and menopause are just normal stages of development.
Right.
And we know women and men too develop differently and uniquely.
That's right.
So to really be able to improve quality of life and decision making and care and even cost, reduce unnecessary costs, which may come about because a woman has a symptom and runs to a specialist because she doesn't know it's part of her transition,
Exactly.
or tries to treat it without much success. We need to have a better understanding how women progress through this individually. So
That's
that's the
like
kind of research we're doing.
that that's power packed. So with that last part, does that mean that we go back to pre-menarche or the
Go
menarche?
back. Yeah. So what we're initiating is what we call in our survey a pilot study. We would like to do an extremely detailed, comprehensive analysis of the data of a woman's life journey. But that's a very large and expensive type of study.
Yes.
And also requires revealing a lot of personal information. So what we're trying to do is do a pilot study where, without having to collect what's called personal identification information, so an individual can remain anonymous at the first stage,
Mm.
what kind of information can we collect that a woman would know about without having to go into records? What
Right.
can she tell you about herself? And can we use that level of information to start to show that this is an important kind of data that's not being collected, to justify then getting the funding for a very, very large study?
Yes.
And the large study is like the Nurses Health Study or the Swan Study, etc.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that means, what data do we believe we should be able to collect? And what we believe we should be able to collect along those terms are things like age of menarche, age of first pregnancy, when pregnancies occurred, and what was the gestational age at time of delivery. And that starts to look at some of what we're trying to do, is not just look at a very, very large database of information and use things like artificial intelligence to tell us what's significant. We're trying that's really what we call correlative analysis, because we're looking at statistics there.
Right.
What we're interested in is causal analysis, because with causal analysis we can start to understand what may be underlying mechanisms, where new testing could be developed, how early testing could be done, how early a woman may be able to identify what to expect even before she enters into the transition, and then how to manage it better. So the reasons we're looking at things such as what I just described is, we know that menarche is occurring earlier and earlier,
Yes, it is.
and it occurs differently also in different population groups.
That's right.
We know that first pregnancy occurs later and later.
That's
And
right.
also even in different population groups.
Hmm.
So one of the things that means is there's a term called no Paris, and we usually think of a no Paris woman as someone who hasn't undergone a pregnancy. But the reality of no Paris is someone who has not delivered a live birth. And what I just described, because of those two changes, menarche starting earlier, first pregnancy later, the no Paris stage for any woman is a time between menarche and first delivery, and that's increasing. So we know that that's increasing slightly, and that may be something that we need to understand. But it's a simple measure that we're not taking into consideration directly. The other kind of parameter we're looking at is, as I said, gestational age at delivery. And the reason we're interested in that is that during pregnancy, the body is normally set to expect a 37 to 40-week gestation period.
Hmm.
With a premature delivery, there are a number of developmental stages that the mother doesn't go through, and hormones generated both by the fetus and the mother that she won't experience. And the question is, does that actually impact either her transition or her risk for postmenopausal disease? And so
Wow.
those are the kinds of things we think are interesting and questions that have a basis in mechanisms that could be related to how women go through perimenopause and menopause, and also develop postmenopausal disease risk. But they're things that we don't have the data for. And so we've been looking at several international databases. We're looking
Hmm.
at the US All of Us database. We're looking at the UK Biobank. We're looking at the SWAN study. We're looking at the Nurses Health study. We're looking at the Australian Longitudinal Women's study. And we're looking at some of the Nordic databases. The kinds of data we would like to be able to incorporate into a model don't exist. And that's why we're initiating the survey, to try to get some of that data to show the value of then making that a much bigger data collection. So
Yes.
that's a long answer to your
It's a
question.
long, much needed answer because again, it's number one, thank you for doing this because like you said, there's nothing like this out there. And we need the totality, of everything that we go through, that we're made of as a woman to get that answer to that, how can we have a better menopause experience?
Mhm.
And it's just I can't I'm mind blown like every time I speak to you because number one, I just learned a ton, but the fact that none of this has been done over all of these years is just mind blowing. Knowing the impact and the effects that, menopause have for myself. I know when you spoke earlier about the symptoms, and you were saying like someone might have, the brain fog, someone might have urinary incontinence, and so forth and so on. I think I have had every single symptom under the book.
Mhm.
So with no understanding, going into it.
Yeah.
So again, this is it's so needed. And I thank you for coming forth to fill this void because it's going to change, the lives of women and how we, embark on our journey. And like you said, the outcome. Why do you think this has not been done? And I know that's probably like a question, but in your opinion.
Well, um, I mean, most research is male dominated, has been male dominated. Um, I think personally, if men went through menopause of the same nature that women go through, it might have been studied much earlier than it is.
I
Uh,
agree with that.
but I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, that's safe for both of us. Yes, I agree with you. And again, I thank you for doing this. I cannot wait to see the other side, because eventually it's coming. What one I had another question for you too regarding it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, along with International Menopause Awareness Month,
Right.
Domestic Violence Month. We have a lot of things going on this month, but there is a correlation between menopause and breast cancer. And there is still like a lot of confusion around that too. Can
Well,
you to that just a little bit for me?
yeah. So most people um, have heard about things like BRCA1 and BRCA2, and
Mhm.
it's increased risk for breast cancer. But it's a much more complicated situation than that. Those do increase your risk for breast cancer. They don't automatically guarantee that you will get breast cancer. And there are four major subtypes of breast cancer. Even if you have a BRCA1 mutation, the breast cancer you get may not be a BRCA1 breast cancer. And it's those kinds of nuances that frequently get lost. Of the known genetic variants that are associated with breast cancer, they really only make up less than about 10% of all breast cancers. The vast majority of breast cancers show up as a woman enters into perimenopause and menopause. And the peak starts in the early 40s and then continues on and drops off as women get older. But it's obviously associated with the transition through perimenopause and menopause. But we believe in our work that an individual's risk is unique to them and not just because of that age of transition. And it requires understanding their whole life journey to get to that point. As I said, the menarche issue, the no parity issue, the even premature delivery issue. Now, that doesn't in any way mean that we're not interested in lifestyle
Right.
or social determinants of health, environmental exposure, other comorbid conditions. But that is what we would be including in the larger study, because for that we need to have identifiable patients and
Yes.
contributors to the study. So that's why they're not included in the initial study, so that we can run a pilot that's manageable and cost effective at the same time.
Yes. Thank you for that. That was great information. I know there's a lot of confusion around, the menopause and breast cancer. Um,
Well, and there's a tendency for breast cancer to run in the family,
yes, it is.
but that doesn't even mean that you have the same breast cancer that your mother or your aunt had.
And most people believe that.
Right.
They that well, number one, that's what you're told, you know. Even with your menopause story, it's like, oh, you're gonna ask your mom or the lady, you're gonna mimic them. And it totally, I mean, yes, it can happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it's gonna happen.
Right.
Um,
And some of it may be that you have the same genetic makeup,
mhm,
but then that same genetic makeup could be modified or modulated by environment and lifestyle, etc. Or
right.
you have different genetic makeup, but you still have the same disease. That's the kinds of complexity that we have to better understand.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. What has been some of the challenges for you with this study? I mean,
Well, we're finding out that even the databases that are considered gold standard databases, so to speak,
mhm,
internationally, like All of Us and UK Biobank, they're incomplete. They're incomplete on two different levels. One is they don't have the data fields collected that we want, as I described. But also, even in the data fields they do collect, they may not be complete. And that makes it a challenge when we're trying to even incorporate them into the analysis. We'll start off with a database. Sasha, who's my data scientist who works with me, started off with a database that had over 250,000 women in it. And by the time she extracted what we could work with, it was down to a couple hundred. And it's not, in part, it's because the data doesn't exist in a complete manner. And
wow, substantial.
yeah, that now there's you also have to understand there's sort of at least two different kinds of data sets. Things like All of Us, UK Biobank, etc., are recruiting women, but they're recruiting women who are alive. Therefore, we're not incorporating women who have died. And that means we don't have a complete profile of the population.
Yeah.
The Nordic databases, which are registries from the government, include everyone because you're included pre-birth and all the way through your health journey. It's not something where they're recruiting you in for the majority of these databases. So there's different levels of data as well that have to be considered when you're doing these analyses. And then on top of that, you have the reality that the label of a data field in a database may not mean the same thing in two different databases. And you have to get to the level of granularity to understand that one was tested one way and one was tested another way, and they're not equivalent. So those are the things, if you really want to have accurate, clean data to analyze, that you have to really dig deeply into to be able to do the analysis.
Yeah, it's a lot. It is a lot. And again, I thank you for, doing the work and staying on the course. And I know that people are probably like, why in the world do you want to work? What are you doing in menopause? Not that that's your area of work at all, but you don't really see too many men working in the menopause arena. So I'm grateful and blessed to have you working
Well,
for
we
us.
also we also work at the other end of the spectrum because we're working in preeclampsia and hypertensive disorders of pregnancy to understand infant and maternal morbidity and mortality. So we're not purely working at the menopause level,
Right,
but we
right.
are working all the way at the other end of the spectrum, even in terms of IVF and assisted reproductive technologies.
Which is definitely huge right now. I mean, not that I'm saying right now because I think it's more prevalent now than in the past. And that to me, that raises my eyebrow also because I'm like, what's different now? Of course, we can go on and on, the food, the environment, all of those things.
Right.
I have several people that I'm connected to that had to go through IVF, dealing with infertility issues and things like that. And again, it was quite alarming seeing the amount of women, and particularly Black women, and how much they were affected by infertility. And I'm just proud to be alongside of you and seeing you just work and do all the amazing things that you do because we need it. We need you for sure. And I know I speak for myself and the millions and billions of other woman out there, especially the menopausal woman.
Well, I always tell people menopause affects 51% of the world's population directly and 49% indirectly. So it's a global issue.
I love that. It is for sure. Well, once again, I thank you for being here and offering your time and support.